Okay, I think we can get started now. Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar titled Post-Quantum, No Longer Just a Buzzword with Professor Douglas Stebila. My name is Anthony Hugh, and I will be hosting this presentation. Today, we here at Wolf SSL are honored to have Professor Douglas Stebila as a guest speaker to talk about post-quantum cryptography. At the end of this presentation, both Professor Stebila and I will be available for questions. However, in order to more easily coordinate, this presentation has been pre-recorded, so any comments and questions will be handled at the end. But first, I would like to give a brief company overview before we move to the technical presentation. Wolf SSL was founded in 2004 by Todd Alska and Larry Stefanik when they realized there wasn't an open source dual license embedded SSL library available. OpenSSL existed at the time, but there was a demand for an alternative that was easily portable, smaller, faster, available under a clear commercial license, was equipped with a clean and modern API, and offered commercial-style developer support. Thus, Wolf SSL was born into this market need, with an OpenSSL compatibility layer. Today, Wolf SSL secures over 2 billion connections. We have more than 1,000 OEM customers and dozens of resellers. Wolf SSL is made up of almost 50 dedicated employees in 2022, most of which are engineers. This progress is of course supported by a strong partner network that we're proud of, which includes DDCI, STMicro, and RTI, just to name a few. Since the beginning, our engineering team has developed several embedded security products, including WolfCrypt with DO-178 support, FIPS certification, and a FIPS-ready offering. We have MQTT up to the version 5 specification, SSH version 2, TPM 2.0, a secure bootloader known as WolfBoot, as well as Java wrappers and JSSE support, and commercial support for curl. All of these offerings are accompanied by thorough maintenance and support plans up to the 24/7 level. We also offer full service consulting. I invite you to follow us on Twitter with the handle @WolfSSL, as well as all our other socials. Also, feel free to email us at facts@wolfssl.com if you have any additional questions. And now, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Douglas Stebila.
Thanks, Anthony. Hi, I'm Douglas Stebila. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Combinatorics and Optimization in the Faculty of Mathematics at the University of Waterloo. And I work on post-quantum cryptography, and I'm really excited today to talk to you about post-quantum cryptography. We'll go over the background of post-quantum cryptography, take a look at an example of one scheme based on the learning with errors problem, which is at the heart of the Kyber scheme that was selected by NIST recently for standardization, and we'll talk a little bit about the overall process of migrating to post-quantum cryptography. Let's start off with the question of why we even need to consider transitioning to post-quantum cryptography. When we're browsing the web on our favorite website, hopefully our connection is protected by cryptography. When we look in the address bar, we should see the lock icon, which indicates that the transport layer security protocol is being used to protect our connection. When we drill down into the cryptography that's being used, we can see a variety of cryptographic algorithms being used. In this case, we've got two types of cryptography being used. Public key cryptography. For this connection, it's protected with RSA signatures in the certificate for authentication, and elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange in the handshake to establish a shared secret. and symmetric cryptography, in this case using the AES algorithm for both encryption and integrity protection of application data, the actual contents of the web page. It's this public key cryptography that we're worried about in the context of quantum computers. RSA signatures are based on the difficulty of factoring large numbers, and it turns out that this problem, while difficult for classical computers, could be solved if we had a large-scale quantum computer, and similarly for our Diffie-Hellman key exchange establishing a shared secret. So this motivates the need for post-quantum cryptography, sometimes called quantum-resistant algorithms, which is the design of cryptography that's believed to be resistant to attack by quantum computers. But it's important to note that post-quantum cryptography only uses classical operations to implement, not quantum operations. So we can run this on today's normal classical computers, but we hope that it will still be resistant to attack even if our adversaries had large, powerful quantum computers. Now, to implement post-quantum cryptography, there are several different mathematical assumptions that we can build post-quantum algorithms from, including hash-based cryptography, multivariate quadratic equations, algorithms based on error-correcting codes, lattice-based cryptography, and elliptic curve isogenies. A little bit later, we'll look at the details behind lattice-based cryptography, one of the most popular and performant options for post-quantum cryptography. But it's important to note that these algorithms are not a panacea. They're not quite as well studied as our current encryption algorithms, which we've been studying since the 70s. So we're a little bit less confident in the security of some of these constructions. And they're also not ideal from an implementation perspective. They have some trade-offs. Some of them either have slower computation or larger communication sizes than the cryptography that we're used to using today. So there are some challenges in deploying post-quantum cryptography. I do also want to contrast post-quantum cryptography, which uses classical operations on classical computers, from quantum cryptography, most popularly described by quantum key distribution, that uses quantum mechanics to protect information. Now, this requires new devices. It doesn't require necessarily a full quantum computer, but it does require new communication infrastructure and new hardware to implement. So this is not the subject of this talk. It's a really interesting area, but it's not something we'll be looking at today. Let's take a quick look at one of the mathematical options available for building post-quantum cryptography, the most popular one in use today, called the learning with errors problem. So let's go back to first year linear algebra. So if I gave you a system of linear equations described by this blue matrix on the left multiplied by some secret red vector to get a result, and I gave you the blue matrix, the starting blue matrix, and the ending blue vector, and asked you to find the secret red vector, well, with a little bit of effort, you'd be able to do that. We can solve this using Gaussian elimination from Linear Algebra 101. So the problem of finding this red secret vector given a matrix and the result of this matrix product is easy. But we can tweak this to turn it into a problem that we can use for cryptography. This is called the learning with errors problem that was introduced by Regev in 2005. Again, we start off with a matrix and we multiply it by a secret vector, but this time we add a little bit of noise to the result. We perturb the values in our result before computing the final blue vector. And so if I gave you the starting blue matrix and the ending blue vector, and asked you to find the secret red vector, this actually turns out to be a hard problem in some cases. We call it the search learning with errors problem. Search for this secret vector given some errors have been added to it. Now, the example that I've shown here is a toy example with a small matrix, but in practice we need much larger values in order to make this hard for both classical and quantum computers to solve. We might have a matrix that's got 640 rows and 8 columns, but we can construct such instances and have something that's believed to be hard to solve. So that's our introduction to the learning with errors problem.
Professor Stebila, I have a question. I was wondering, is the noise vector, is that public information or is that part of the secret?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anthony. So the noise vector is secret. It's never revealed publicly and never given to the adversary. And because there are many different possibilities for the noise vector, without knowing the noise vector, the adversary can't perform Gaussian elimination and recover our secret value. There are just too many possibilities for the noise vector, and it disrupts the computation, so they're not able to recover the secret value. Now that we've seen the learning with errors problem, let's try to build a public key encryption scheme from it. First, let's remember what public key encryption is. There's three parts to public key encryption. There's a key generation algorithm that generates a private key and a related public key. And we can give out the public key to anyone, and anyone with this public key can encrypt a message to us, and that encryption procedure will take the public key and a message to produce the ciphertext. And then we as the recipient can take our secret key and the ciphertext that was sent to us and put them both into the decryption algorithm to recover the original message M. Now, as you're looking at post-quantum cryptography, you might also see a related construction called a key encapsulation mechanism. Many of the algorithms that are being standardized are actually phrased in terms of a key encapsulation mechanism, which is similar but also slightly different compared to a public key encryption scheme. There's still a key generation algorithm, but instead of having encryption, there's a procedure called encapsulation, which only takes in the public key and generates both the ciphertext and a shared secret key K. So it's like public key encryption, but there's no message being encrypted. Instead, it's encapsulating a secret key that both parties will use later to encrypt messages using an algorithm like the Advanced Encryption Standard, AES. And finally, a chem also has this decapsulation procedure that the recipient can use with their secret key and ciphertext to recover the key. But let's focus on public key encryption from the learning with errors problem. So I'll tell you first how key generation works. We're going to take this matrix multiplication and turn it into key generation. So we'll pick a random public matrix A and multiply it by a secret vector S, add some error noise E to get the result B, okay, just like we saw a few slides ago. The public key will be the starting matrix A and the ending vector B, and our secret key will be the secret vector S. So exactly like we saw in our example a few slides ago. That's key generation. Now we need to show how someone can use the public key to encrypt a message. So the first thing they'll do is they'll take the matrix A that's part of the public key and pick their own secret vector S prime to multiply the matrix by and add their own error vector E prime to create the first part of our ciphertext B prime. The sender will also take the other part of the receiver's public key, the B, and multiply it by the same secret vector S prime, add a little bit of noise E prime to get a value V prime. And we're going to use this V prime to encrypt a message for our recipient. Our recipient message is only going to be a single bit. We'll take this V prime and we'll use it as a mask, a pad, to encrypt the message. So we'll take V prime and we'll add it to our message. Although we're going to transform our message slightly before we do this addition by multiplying our message by Q over 2. We haven't talked about what Q is. It's basically a modulus that we're using to do modular arithmetic. So we'll multiply our message by half of this modulus, add it to our shared mask V prime, and we'll get our second ciphertext component C. So we have two values as part of our encryption here. B prime, which is kind of a helper value, and C, which is the encryption of our message. So that's how we prepare a message for public key encryption using learning with errors. And now we send B prime and C to our recipient, and they're going to have to decrypt. So the recipient will take the B prime ciphertext, multiply it by their secret key, and we'll call that result V. And the reason I've called it V is because it's going to be almost the same as the V prime that that the sender used to encrypt the message. So we'll take this V and we'll subtract it from the other ciphertext component C. If you remember, C was constructed by taking V prime and adding a multiple of our message to get C. So when we subtract something close to V prime from C, we should get something close to a multiple of our message. And then we'll apply a procedure called rounding to turn that thing back into our actual message. We can correct from something that's close to our message to something that's actually our message. And now there's been a little bit of approximation here. So we want to know that this actually works. So let's just take one last look at the mathematics here to see if this actually does work. So when the sender encrypted, they were using a V prime, which was given by this equation here, matrix multiplications and additions as shown here. And when we expand out this formula, we see that we get the first term is this S prime AS plus a bunch of stuff in the parentheses. And based on the parameters that we use, the stuff in the parentheses here is going to be a small value. So what we have here in V prime is something that is close to S prime AS. And then when we look at the calculations that the receiver used during decryption, and we expand out their formulas, we again see something that looks like S prime AS plus a value in parentheses, which turns out to be small. And so the values that used by the sender and the receiver are both approximately equal to S prime AS. And as long as we pick our values appropriately, we'll be able to decrypt with very high probability.
Professor Stebila, I have another question. I was wondering, I've heard about decryption errors happening. Can I ask you how that affects this algorithm and how they occur?
Great question, Anthony. So it is possible that when we look at these equations here, that the values of the noise terms, the things in parentheses, won't quite be as small as we like because they're picked randomly from a certain distribution, and that the rounding procedure that we saw on the previous slide might give us the wrong answer. So it is theoretically possible. However, for all the encryption schemes that have been standardized, including Kyber, the parameters are chosen so that the chance of this happening is exponentially small, with probability smaller than 2 to the negative 128. So for all practical purposes, this is never going to happen within the lifetime of the universe. So that's how public key encryption works, and we can make sure that it decrypts successfully, but it's also important to know whether it's secure or not. And it turns out that we can prove that the learning with errors public key encryption scheme we've seen is secure if some related mathematical problem is hard, namely the problem of finding short vectors in lattices. Of course, that just translates the question to another spot. Then we have to worry about whether it's hard to find short vectors in lattices. Well, the short answer is that we don't know any efficient algorithm for classical or quantum computers to find short vectors in lattices. And we've been trying for several years to find such an algorithm. But we also don't have a proof that no algorithm exists. This is actually similar to the case that we had for RSA for many years. We didn't know any classical algorithm for solving RSA, but there's also no proof that none existed. Ideally, we would have a proof that none existed, but it's very hard to build such a proof. So our best evidence at this point in time is that it appears to be a hard problem from which we can build reliable and secure cryptography. So from all of these ingredients, we get to the Kyber encryption scheme that has been standardized by NIST. we take the learning with errors problem, or a variant of it called module learning with errors, which is a little bit more compact. And we combine that with this public key encryption scheme that I showed you on the previous slides. And we add one more ingredient called the Fujisaki-Okamoto transform, which makes it secure against an active attacker that can do something called a chosen ciphertext attack. We combine all of the ingredients, and then we get a scheme called Kyber, which is has been recently selected for standardization by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST. So let's talk a little bit more about the standardization of post-quantum cryptography. When we think about standardized cryptography, there's actually a very long path. We start off with the mathematics, trying to come up with good, secure cryptographic algorithms. And this is typically left to specialist organizations like the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States, or the IETF's Cryptographic Forum Research Group, or other specialists working in conjunction with academics. And then we need to standardize how these cryptographic algorithms are going to be used in particular pieces of technology. And here's where we switch to the role of technology standards organizations like the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, or ANSI, or other industry bodies. And then we have to talk about policies for using encryption, and even principles on how we should regulate and legislate cryptography. So there is a long path to standardization. But we've already begun the path towards standardizing post-quantum cryptography at the first two levels of the mathematics and the technologies. The process really was kicked off in 2015 with an announcement from the National Security Agency indicating that they intended to transition to quantum-resistant algorithms in the not-too-distant future. And this was followed by an announcement by NIST, which standardizes cryptography for the US government, in their announcement in 2016 that they wanted to start a standardization process for post-quantum cryptography. And the timeline of that process was that we had a call for proposals from NIST in December 2016, calling for algorithms to be submitted by November 2017. And they were considering the standardization of public key encryption schemes and digital signature algorithms. In November 2017, they received the first round of submissions with 69 schemes, about 1/3 of which were signature schemes, and 2/3 of which were public key encryption schemes. These algorithms were publicly studied for about a year and a half, with NIST accepting feedback from researchers around the world. And in March 2019, NIST accepted 26 schemes into the second round of study, 9 signature schemes and 17 public key encryption schemes. These were studied for another year and a half, and in October 2020, NIST narrowed it down to a small collection of finalists and alternates. And then since October 2020, these finalists and alternates were subjected to further public scrutiny. And just a couple months ago, in July 2022, NIST announced its selections for standardization. They selected 3 signature schemes and 1 public key encryption scheme for standardization. They also indicated that they wanted to continue on with some further study of algorithms in round 4. NIST has indicated that it expects to issue a final standard by 2024 for giving the final specification of the algorithms that were selected from round 3. And over the next few years, we'll also continue with a round 4, examining some of these public key encryption schemes, as well as inviting some new signature schemes to be submitted for consideration in a future round of standardization. So this is where the standards stand at the moment, but the natural question is whether we'll be ready in time for the potential attack by quantum computers. So let's just look at our timeline. We saw this selection by NIST in 2022 with a proposed standard in 2024. When do we expect to have quantum computers? Well, that's the million-dollar question, or the billion-dollar question, and it's impossible to predict the future. But a variety of individuals and organizations have given some estimates on when they think it's possible that there may be a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. There are some estimates from my colleague here at the University of Waterloo, Michele Mosca, on the chance that we might have a quantum computer at certain periods of time around 2026 or 2031 as having some small chance of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And a little bit further into the 2030s, we see more experts giving a higher chance that there may be a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. It is still a major engineering challenge to build a quantum computer, but it's important to start now in terms of standardizing post-quantum cryptography. And the reason for this is that even if we don't have a quantum computer for many years, an attacker who is recording today's information will still be able to decrypt it later once they have a quantum computer. This is called the harvest and decrypt attack. So an adversary who's been recording communications today or even many years ago, and these communications were protected by RSA or elliptic curve cryptography, could decrypt this information once they have a quantum computer. So it's really important to start the migration to post-quantum cryptography even before a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is available. Just looking a little bit more at the NIST process, as I mentioned, in NIST round 3, there were several finalists and alternate candidates chosen from the different mathematical assumptions that we saw earlier in this webinar. We had key encapsulation mechanisms based on code-based and lattice-based cryptography, and signature algorithms based on lattices and multivariate algorithms as well. And then there's some alternates for further consideration, both key encapsulation mechanisms and signature schemes. I don't want to talk about many of the details of these algorithms, but I do want to highlight some of the trade-offs in their performance characteristics. And so we'll look at the communication sizes and the performance characteristics of these algorithms. In terms of our key encapsulation mechanisms, or public key encryption schemes, here are the finalists that we saw from round 3. There were 3 lattice-based algorithms called Saber, N-True, and Kyber, and 1 code-based algorithm called Classic McLeese. And on the left here, you can see the communication sizes, the sizes of the public keys and ciphertext of these algorithms compared with our traditional algorithms, elliptic curves and RSA. And you can see that all of these algorithms have communication sizes larger than we're used to. For elliptic curves, for example, we've been spoiled, and we're able to do elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman with just 32 bytes of communication from each party. But with our lattice-based algorithms, we need 600 to 800 bytes of communication. For our code-based algorithm, Classic McLeese, we have relatively small ciphertext, 128 bytes, but unfortunately, this is traded off with very large public keys, more than 200 kilobytes. This is going back to what I mentioned earlier with some trade-offs inherent in our post-quantum algorithms. As for computation times, here are the run times for our various post-quantum algorithms compared to our classical algorithms. And although we can see some have, McLeese has some larger key generation time, overall, our post-quantum algorithms are still quite performant in the same neighborhood as our traditional algorithms.
Professor Stebila, these numbers suggest the classic McLeese isn't very appropriate. Is there a reason why it's still being considered?
So classic McLeese is interesting because it does have these really small ciphertexts. So if you're in a scenario where it's possible to pre-distribute your public keys, classic McLeese actually could be quite compelling. Classic McLeese is also interesting from a security perspective. The McLeese crypto system actually dates from 1978, the exact same year that the RSA public key encryption scheme was published. So it actually has as long a history as RSA and has been, subject to cryptographic analysis for this long period of time as well. So we have a bit more confidence in the security of classic McLeese. So in a super high security scenario, you might also choose to use classic McLeese because of its longer history of study. So those are our public key encryption schemes. There's also our signature schemes. And again, we see some trade-offs. The first two NIST round 3 finalists, Falcon and Dilithium here, are based on lattices. And again, their public key and signature sizes are bigger than our existing algorithms based on elliptic curves or RSA in the range of 600 to 2000 bytes. There's a third algorithm here, Rainbow, that was under consideration, which had very small signatures, but quite large public keys. However, Rainbow did not advance to the fourth round of consideration and has not been selected for standardization, in part because of a break of some of the lower level security parameters of Rainbow. Looking at the runtime, the performance of these algorithms, we can again see that overall their performance is fairly comparable to the public key algorithms that we're used to today. And they could be used without a significant impact on performance in most cases. That was the round 3 algorithms. As I mentioned, in July 2022, NIST issued its selections from round 3, and it selected one public key encryption scheme for standardization, Kyber, the lattice-based scheme, and 3 signature schemes for standardization, 2 based on lattices and 1 based on hash functions, the Sphinx Plus algorithm. Then there's a few more algorithms that have been that NIST has decided to continue studying in further round of consideration. For key encapsulation mechanisms, NIST had selected 4 algorithms for further study, 3 code-based algorithms, including the classic McLeese algorithm we talked about on the previous slide, and a different algorithm based on elliptic curve isogenies called Psych. Unfortunately, there was recently a break of the Psych algorithm announced, and so Psych is no longer under consideration. But perhaps we'll see some future isogeny-based algorithms in the coming years. NIST has also indicated that they're going to be considering an additional process for new signature schemes to see if the research has advanced over the past few years and there are better signature algorithms that have smaller communication sizes. So that'll be something that the research community investigates over the coming years. There's lots of work over the past few years on developing prototype implementations and experiments to see the effect of post-quantum cryptography. And Anthony has told you a bit about the work that Wolf SSL has been doing. My research group has also been leading a research project called Open Quantum Safe, which has provided some software for prototyping quantum-resistant cryptography. And in this Open Quantum Safe project, we have a software library called liboqs that contains implementations of the post-quantum algorithms from the NIST process, the key encapsulation mechanisms and signature schemes that we've seen over the course of this webinar. liboqs is a C language library that has optimizations for x86-64 and ARM, and also supports a variety of application layer software. We've integrated post-quantum algorithms into forks of OpenSSL, Boring SSL, and OpenSSH, and provided demonstrators for using these in applications like Apache and Nginx and the Chromium web browser. And we've done this with help from a variety of industry partners and funders. In these applications, you'll see the choice of a hybrid approach. This is a cautious approach that many people are advocating to protect us as we move forward in the transition. We do have the concern that these post-quantum solutions that we're moving to are newer, and there's the potential that they could not be as strong as we hope. So many people are advocating for a hybrid approach where we use traditional algorithms like RSA or elliptic curves in combination with post-quantum algorithms to reduce the risk during transition. Ideally, we would combine these algorithms in a way where it's secure if either of these remains secure. So we have the best of both worlds. If you're considering adopting post-quantum cryptography, it's really important to focus on algorithms that have advanced through the NIST process. We want to be using algorithms that have been widely studied by the cryptographic community. We want to be using these in a cautious hybrid approach to take a conservative approach to the transition. And we want to be sure that we're using secure implementations from high quality vendors and open source implementations. Thanks to wolfSSL for inviting me to speak. I hope this has given you a good introduction to post-quantum cryptography. Post-quantum crypto is a really important part of continuing to secure our communication infrastructure against threats. Even though we're not sure when a quantum computer might be built, and even though they don't exist yet, it's important to start the transition to post-quantum cryptography sooner rather than later because of the risk of harvest and decrypt attacks, where an attacker in the future uses a quantum computer to decrypt communications that they recorded today. Thanks for watching and have a great day.
Alrighty, hi everyone. I'm Kajal Zipcode. I'll be another moderator for this webinar. Now is the question and answer session. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box and ask the question, and we'll read the questions aloud and ask them live right now.
Hi, everyone. This is Douglas Stebila here. I'm happy to take your questions. So one of the questions that has come through from Yuri is asking about decryption failures. Aren't there attacks that can accelerate appearance of these errors, i.e. have an adversary provoke them? And yeah, Yuri, that's a really good question. So it is possible that these decryption failures in lattice-based key encapsulation mechanisms that there is the possibility for the adversary to try to trigger them. I'd say that the early analyses of the algorithms mostly took a honest but curious approach. So the early analyses kind of just try to figure out whether there were likely to be decryption failures for honest users. But in the past 5 years, we have seen those analyses extended to worry about adversarially crafted ciphertexts and the chance of decryption failures in those. So for example, if you look at the Kyber specification document that was submitted in round 3. I think you'll see one of the sections there in the later part of the document explicitly talks about the adversary's ability to trigger those failures. So hopefully that, that will provide some information to help you understand that further. Another question from Yuri is about why there are almost no PQ analogs of Diffie-Hellman key agreement schemes, and 1 of 2 submitted were dropped. So the difference here in terms of key agreement schemes versus key encapsulation mechanisms, I guess would be that in a key agreement scheme, kind of Alice and Bob are contributing equally or having symmetric roles in the protocol. So in Diffie-Hellman, Alice can compute a g to the x, and Bob can compute a g to the y, and they can compute and send those independently of the other's contribution. Whereas in a key encapsulation mechanism, Bob can't construct his response, his ciphertext, until he receives Alice's contribution, the chem public key. And certainly we would prefer to have key agreement schemes with the Diffie-Hellman flow of communication because we can fit those into more places and they provide more flexibility, but they're just harder to construct. So for our lattice-based schemes, no one's been able to come up with a way of constructing these that doesn't have Bob's message depending on Alice's message. The only post-quantum one that we really have at the moment is Seaside, commutative supersingular isogeny Diffie-Hellman. It was invented later than the NIST call for submissions, so it wasn't able to be included in the original submissions in 2017. As it currently stands, it is fairly computationally expensive. So even more so than SIDH and Psych were. So whether it's a drop-in replacement for Diffie-Hellman kind of remains unclear. It's also unclear how to scale, at least as far as I remember from the last time I heard about it, it's also unclear how to scale Seaside to higher security levels because the process of selecting Seaside parameters actually, the only algorithm we know of for doing that efficiently right now is a quantum algorithm. So we would kind of need a quantum algorithm to select large Seaside instances. So yes, the summary is, why are there no PQ analogs of Diffie-Hellman key agreement? We'd love to have them if we could, but they just turn out to be really hard to construct. Okay, so the next question is asking, where is the best place to keep up with quantum safe algorithms being broken? And I think the 2 good places for that are the NIST PQC forum. That's the mailing list that NIST set up for the PQC standardization process. And you can sign up for that via links at nist.gov/PQCrypto. And the second place would be to follow the ICR's cryptology ePrint archive, which is where results tend to be posted rather quickly. It's a pre-publication archive, so not all results there have been peer-reviewed, so you should take them with a grain of salt. But it's one of the places to keep up with new results as well, and that's available at eprint.iacr.org. The next question here is for Wolf SSL. So Anthony, I don't know if you'd like to answer that one. Has Wolf SSL provided any of these features with speed Wolf provides for classical mechanisms?
Our implementation is of these algorithms actually is under development right now. So right now we're working on Kyber. But as of yet, all the implementations that we've done so far are integrations with Professor Stebila's LibOQS project. And their performance isn't bad. It's perfectly fine for what needs to be done now, which is experimentation. And everybody should be trying these out, looking into whether the keys and artifact sizes are can fit within your infrastructure. As time goes on, we will be releasing our implementations, and they will be optimized and faster for different platforms. and architectures.
Great. Another question coming in from Kevin saying the key sizes and communication sizes seem like a real problem for embedded systems, especially those for very low power or very high temperature environments. What are your thoughts? Is there a working group or plan to address this? Yeah, Kevin, that's a really good point. As some of the later slides pointed out, these sizes are larger than we would like and larger than we're used to. And I would say that we don't have a great plan for this, for resolving this. In order to resolve this, we really need new mathematical insights, new ideas for constructing algorithms, or new analyses of the security of these algorithms, hoping that they are actually more secure than we understand them to be now. Basically, we have estimates on how secure something is, what the runtime is of the best algorithms we know of for solving the problem, and then we pick parameter sizes such that the runtime of those algorithms meets a certain bound that's prohibitively expensive. So in order to have smaller key sizes or smaller communication sizes, we either need to have new mathematical algorithms that happen to be slower to solve, or we need to better understand the existing algorithms or the existing problems and realize that perhaps our estimates were too conservative. So I don't expect that within the next 5 years that we will have substantially smaller communication sizes available among post-quantum options. Our best size ones was SIDH, but as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, that one was recently broken. Perhaps Seaside will be a candidate here. Seaside does have smaller key sizes and communication sizes. It wasn't in the NIST competition, as I mentioned, it has other drawbacks, including higher communication or computation costs. So I'd say that is still very much a research question that requires a lot of work to come up with more satisfactory solutions for. And another question from Yuri. So what are the security consequences of adversary-triggered decryption failures and the expected complexity of mounting such an attack? So in terms of the consequences of adversary-triggered decryption failures, it would depend on the scheme. If memory serves for Kyber, an adversary-triggered decryption failure could lead to recovery of the secret key. So that would be one of the consequences. As for the expected complexity, the parameters of Kyber are now chosen so that the expected complexity of mounting such an attack approximately matches the overall security level. So Kyber level 1 is targeting the security level equivalent to AES 128. And the estimates for attacking that are given in the Kyber specification. I've got it in front of me. It's hard to pull out one exact number, but I think it's looking at around 2 to the 150 gates to carry out an attack against Kyber. And that would, if I understand Kyber's analysis correctly, that should include the decryption failure attacks. So it should be just as hard to carry out a decryption failure attack as it is to, in general, attack Kyber. So those should be prohibitively expensive based on the selection of Kyber parameters. But it is worth checking the Kyber specification again to be sure about that. So those are all the questions that have come in so far. We've got a few more minutes if anyone would like to pop in with another question.
And while we wait, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel at WolfSSL tomorrow morning. So please stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to receive a copy of the slide deck, please email us at facts, that's FACTS at wolfssl.com, and we'll be happy to send that over to you. I think those are the last of our questions. Thank you so much, Douglas Stebila, for this fantastic presentation. I know we all really appreciate it. And thank you, Anthony, as well, for coordinating this.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you, Kajal.
We have one question that just came in here.
Okay, yes, this is a question from Marcus. Some algorithms are committed to silicon. For example, ATEX 608A, how long for post-quantum? So I'm afraid, Marcus, I'm not familiar with that specific algorithm. Kind of if you're asking how long until we can expect to see hardware implementations of these algorithms, I can't say that I'm too familiar with the process for implementing algorithms in FPGAs or ASICs. We certainly have seen a variety of implementations focused on software in embedded systems. So there are, implementations available for various smaller ARM processors like the ARM Cortex M4 platform. I think there have started to be a few FPGA implementations available in the literature. As for when you'll start to see those in ASICs and silicon, I'm afraid that's outside of my area of expertise. So I wouldn't be able to give you a satisfactory answer to that.
Okay, awesome. I think those are the last of our questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this webinar. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please email us at facts@wolfssl.com, and we'll be happy to help you as well. I hope everyone has a fantastic day.
Bye-bye.